It is not an industrial metal as we are led to believe. It's a strategic metal, and it is needed. And the countries of the global south are understanding that. And this is why they're draining the LBMA to the second lowest level they've ever had in the history of the exchange, 140 years. This is why they're draining the COMEX. So silver will have its day, and everything that we've ever talked about silver, I think, will happen in spades. It'll just happen in a manner it will go from 0 to 100 just like that. We'll wake up and see it repriced.
This is Kaiser Johnson, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for August 19th through August 26th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature the famous 1-ounce gold Krugerrand at just $60 over spot. Next, we have the favorite bullion coin of Europe, backdated silver Philharmonics at just $3.10 over spot. And finally, we have 1-ounce platinum Canadian maples at only $80 over spot, one of the lowest premiums on platinum we've seen in a long time. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're always delighted to have this widely followed returning guest. Andy Schectman is the CEO of Miles Franklin Precious Metals, and he joins us this Tuesday, August 20th, 2024. Andy, thanks for coming back on for a weekly market update.
And again, I wouldn't miss it. It's my favorite day of the week. So thanks for having me.
You probably would believe, many people wouldn't, how many clients and viewers and subscribers I get pinging me ahead of our interviews. Where's Andy this week? Is it going to be? What's he going to talk about this week? Oh, how come we missed Andy this week? So you're dearly missed when we miss you, and you're highly anticipated in between our visits. So there's been questions submitted this time ahead of your arrival about many topics. One of them we wanted to talk about with you was about privacy of storage and the efficacy of storage in the face of such things as potential government overreach or confiscation or nationalization. Also, in light of the book by David Webb, You Will Own Nothing, or excuse me, this one he wrote is The Great Taking, talking about these creeping laws that have been changed in all 50 states and frankly many countries around the world to basically abrogate people's natural property rights. So what about vault storage for precious metals in the light of people's concerns? Are they sure that it belongs to them and it's going to keep belonging to them given changes that might happen? I know it's hard talking about potentialities in the future because the future is unknowable, but we can certainly look from what we do know and make some pretty good projections. What are your analysis and your expectations about the efficacy, the privacy and the maintenance of private property rights of vault storage for precious metals? And does it matter what kind of vault you're in, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it does kind of matter what kind of vault you're in. But David Rogers Webb, The Great Taking book is terrifying, no question. And I think people should check it out. You get a free download at his website, or go to YouTube and watch his hour-plus podcast or video, rather, that he narrates. He basically is reading the book to you, but it's very frightening. And the difference between physical gold held segregated, that's first and foremost. Your metals must be segregated. They should never be pooled and segregated and never be lent out, because what David is talking about, in essence, is securities held at a central clearing authority. I think it's the DTCC, and how they can be lent out. First and foremost, physical precious metals is not a security. It's not held at a central clearing authority. It's held in a independent vault, segregated 100% in your name. So what David is talking about in this case, in my mind, doesn't apply. It applies to securities that can be rehypothecated or lent out to other institutions who want to short the security or what have you. So I'm not as concerned about David Rogers Webb theory as it pertains to physical holding of precious metals. But I guess you could say in theory that those metals held in an IRA would certainly be noticed by the powers that be in an event of some form of calamity. And we've talked about that before. In 2009, there was a bill that made it down to the House floor that was rejected, basically said if things ever got really bad again, that they could sequester, in essence, all the funds in the IRAs. It goes to show how fast things have grown, because there was $17 trillion debt then. Now it's double that. over double that. And I guess there was roughly 17 trillion back then in IRA funds. And the theory was we take those funds, we put them into some form of an annuity, in essence, backed by U.S. Treasuries, guaranteed by the government. Now that was shot down, but the point is that if we try to delineate metals held in a vault, it's probably a few degrees less in terms of safety in an IRA. Because if you look at an IRA, you're not the owner of the asset; you are the beneficiary of it. The owner is actually the custodian. It's all semantics, but you can always take possession of the metal and liquidate it and say, "Give me my metal." But the point is, it's one layer removed of safety. If it's physically held in a vault, not at an IRA, segregated in a vault like a Brinks, which is a very large company with a big balance sheet and a great track record, excuse me, I think you have a much better chance. But here again, in a systemic world that we find ourselves in, the old statement of if you don't own it, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. While I'm not fully on board with that statement, there's a lot to be said for it. The removal of counterparty risk is huge, and owning physical precious metals gives you the ability to completely remove any and all counterparty risk and escape that type of concern, which I guess you could say is valid. Desperate governments do desperate things. It would be much easier for them to go after the IRAs and metal held within than it would be to go door to door or to enact broadly a confiscation the way Roosevelt did in 33, when in 33 it was currency, and now it just represents such a tiny portion of the assets that the American public owns. So it's valid, but I'm not worried about it in terms of segregated in your own possession, segregated accounts at a Brinks, not in an IRA. I don't think you have anything to worry about, at least at this point.
The way you've laid that out makes me think that there are layers or gray shades of gray of risk. And perhaps the most risky is not having any exposure to precious metals. Is just being completely in the fiat currency and the stock market and the bonds, because then you're completely inside the existing system and completely subject to debasement of the currency, et cetera, banking risk, et cetera. The second would be if you do have exposure to physical precious metals prices by ownership of exchange traded fund like SLV and GLD, but no real ability to ever take physical possession of metals, and that you're just participating in benefiting but from the price movement. But those are securities, as you say. Those are held like shares of stock, and therefore they would be subject to all the concerns that people have after reading The Great Taking, as far as you're not actually the direct legal. You don't have direct legal title to any metal at all there, and those shares could potentially just be swept out, and you could say, "Oh, you got cash settled," or whatever. And then there's the next level of having a physical precious metals IRA where you're not in an allocated and segregated account, which some custodians and some vaults actually still are pushing that, especially for silver. Some people. So I think that's a very important call to put out there to stress people to avoid at all costs any kind of a storage plan that is not allocated and segregated, because you do not have legal rights to the underlying assets in such you can't say, "Give me my stuff," because your stuff's commingled with other people's stuff. It may even be fractional interest in a silver bar or something like that. And then the next is having your own legal title to metals that are not in an IRA but are held in a vault that is allocated and segregated, which should be outside the reach of, it should be completely outside the reach of the exchange funds and those sort of things that you mentioned, these transfer agents, et cetera, that David Webb warns us about for stock shares and that sort of thing. Does it matter what jurisdiction? Because there was a question from a viewer about, is North Dakota special in that regards versus other jurisdictions in terms of upholding and protecting your private property rights? I mean, you could argue North Dakota is, and I'm sorry about my dog. My dog knows when it's about ready to start storming, and it is, and she's been whining at my feet for a minute or two, so I had to put her on my lap. North Dakota is one of the only states, I believe, that has their own banking charter. So in essence, they're not, I guess you could say they have some level of separation from the Federal Reserve.
to me, it's more along the lines of geographic. Most of the vaulting systems are along the eastern seaboard, Delaware, New York City. And you could argue that a place like North Dakota certainly is a good place to be geographically. But what it is more relevant is segregated storage. I had the owner of Delaware Depository. I went to lunch with him. He's a great guy. They run a beautiful facility. It's a COMEX facility. I have not one bad word to say about them. But he said to me, "Why don't you send me more IRA business?" I said, "Because you don't segregate IRA silver." He says, "That's right, we don't." And I just have a big problem with that. They segregate IRA gold. If you open up an account that's not an IRA, they'll segregate it for you. It's because the IRAs attract such a large percentage of volume for these custodians that in order to offer such a low rate, you see the depositories rather, they offer a very low storage rate to the IRA companies, way lower than they would if it weren't in an IRA. And if you were to open up an account at any of the depositories outside your IRA, the rates would be 3 times higher. And so they offer a really low rate, and therefore most of them pool it and allocate it. It's not that it's not safe anymore. It's just there's no title specifically to those items with your name on it. And I said, if you did that, I would send more business your way. But I have a personal aversion to that. And I have stories that I could tell about things that have happened with unallocated accounts. So, or allocated unsegregated, not segregated accounts, pooled accounts. And so bottom line is simply this, that it's very important, I think, if you're going to hold metal in a IRA, that it be completely and totally segregated. If you're going to hold it in any depository, it's completely and totally segregated. And yes, it may cost more money to do so, but I believe it's well worth spending the money. I'll give you another example. The Perth Mint certificate, completely and totally legit entity, but they offer 2 forms of certificates. One is free storage. It's not segregated. The other is segregated, and it's a 1%, I think, which is hefty cost. So most people choose the pooled, allocated. Now, that doesn't mean it's not safe, but there is something to be said for having title in your name of a specific product, specific coin, specific bars. To me, I would never touch anything that is not specifically segregated to you. And I think that's in a world of systemic risk, in a world of over leverage, undercapitalization. It's really important that title is clear and specific title is clear. Who owns it? And so that's a non-starter for me. I would never, ever store my own funds in anything that is not completely and totally segregated.
And I guess that leads us to the 0th layer of that layer cake of risk, and that is having physical possession in your own hands of your own metal, and it would be outside of an IRA. So that is always an option. I mention that to my clients who call about IRAs, is they have the traditional IRA option, they have the Roth IRA option, and they have the no IRA option, which would be outside the IRS system entirely and direct physical possession of your metals. And that usually means a taxable event, and sometimes, depending on age, a 10% penalty for taking a premature distribution. But for some people, it's worth it.
Well, even if you read the laws that talk about metal held outside the country, the IRS is very clear on it. And they say that metal that is pooled is reportable, but metal that is segregated, directly held in a non-financial institution, forget that part for a moment, the non-financial institution. But they make a delineation between segregated and pooled. And if it's pooled, it's reportable, period. And so I think it boils down to title. Is the title in your name? Is it your specific asset in your name? And that's important to me. It's very relevant. And I think counterparty risk, systemic risk is something that will begin to become more prevalent when you see banks failing and the ramifications of it. Specific title is very, very important. And instead of being, even in the way that they define a depositor now as an unsecured general creditor, you need to have direct title, direct ownership in order to feel safe about assets that are not in your own possession. And I think that's the moral of the story.
Yeah, we've spoken with some sheriffs about private property rights and with constitutional attorneys, and private property rights are of grave concern, and rightly so, in the era that we're entering into, where it seems that governments and other authorities, even that consider themselves higher than governments, are getting pretty fast and loose with presumptions about basically abrogating our natural rights to own, to earn, to save, to hold things on our own, and to determine our own lives. One of those areas is about basically devaluing our currency. And that's been something that our government has been doing for a long time. It's certainly reached a hockey stick escalation in recent years. And it's shameful how much finger pointing and distraction. We've talked with Gregor Manarino from TradersChoice.net frequently about this distraction, about look over here, don't look over there. You and I were just speaking about price freezing initiatives or proposals, or price gouging hotline for reporting proposed by, for example, Kamala Harris, or sometimes Trump has talked about that as well, but never actually addressing the actual root cause of price increases, which doesn't start with either vendors or companies raising their prices and gouging. They don't just do that in a vacuum. They're never mentioning that this is policy and that we gave away the store and that we're undermining everyone's earnings, savings, and retirements through debasing the currency. But look over here and blame the companies that are raising their prices or shrinkflating their products. Your thoughts on that phenomenon we have with these candidates telling us they're going to save us from inflation when they're not even addressing the root cause of it, which they say they're fully behind, weaker dollar and lower interest rates, et cetera.
Yeah, that's the point. The folks that think they're trying to fight inflation are only fighting what is the consequence of inflation and rising prices. And when you look at Kamala's platform, she talks about giving $6,000 tax credit for families with a new child, or $25,000 down payment for 400,000 first-generation home buyers, or $10,000 tax credit for the first-time home buyers. Who pays for all that? We're already $35 trillion broke on top of unfunded liabilities. Where does that money come from? So, in essence, at the same time, she's, inflating through policy by creating money to fund these initiatives, and we can't afford them. Then she turns around and blames the problem on the grocery stores for price gouging when it's the government that created the inflation to begin with. And inflation is always, every single time, a monetary event. It's an inflation of the money supply, an increase in the money supply. That is what causes inflation. And when we are creating, in essence, $100,000 a second, 24/7, or $1 trillion every 100 days, well, that's inflation. It's not the cause of the rise, or the rising prices aren't inflation. And we've been indoctrinated into believing the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, take the L out of that and it just be the BS, is inflation. That's not. Rising prices are a symptom of inflation. It's the irresponsibility, fiscal policy, and brain dead monetary policy of the Fed and of the government that are creating these distortions to begin with. And it just goes to show how uninformed the public is, and certainly how uninformed someone like Kamala Harris is in saying this nonsense. I mean, just looking at it alone, just the cost of farmers to process, package, and deliver their food has gone up 31%. Since she's taken office as the vice president, and yet she's blaming it on grocery stores. I used to joke that this industry might be the only industry that makes less than the grocery stores, who make on average 1.5%. They're not the problem. The problem is through all the inputs that have gone up in cost, fuel and seed and certainly fertilizer, most of which comes from Russia, and all of these input costs have gone up, and blaming it on and then trying to impose, capping prices. You go back to the 70s and you read about that, you'll see that farmers had price caps on chicken, and the cost of raising baby chicks to the point where they could then, at a full grown chicken and slaughter it and bring it to the grocery store, It cost more to do that. So they were drowning baby chicks, killing them, because the cost of raising them to adulthood and then bringing them to, be processed costs more than they were allowed to sell them for. All that does is create, empty food shelves and distortions, and people drop out of it. It's communism. It's socialism. Capitalism says a company that can do it more efficiently and do it better, well, they win. And if you can do something more efficient for less money, that is the whole concept of capitalism, bringing value through efficiency instead of imposing, the government's will. And all that does is distort everything that they trust. It's a bad omen that is a path that she is taking, rather than looking within and saying, geez, spending $100,000 a second 24/7 might be the real problem. Wasting our money all around the globe on initiatives we have no business being part of, or wars we have no business being part of. Well, maybe that's something we should look at. Instead, blaming the people who are running grocery stores at tiny margins. How about the margins we see on Wall Street? How about the margins we see other places? It's misdirected, and it's ignorant, and it's very troubling to me when you think about what could be if this administration takes power and starts implementing price controls like that. You'll end up with empty grocery stores and grocery store chains going out of business, and vilifying these people who are so crucial to everyone's life is just not the way to do it. Instead, look within, and that probably won't happen, but that's where the root problem is.
Well, I think you're being maybe overly charitable to say that candidates or politicians who say, let's point the finger at price gouging retailers or merchants or whatever, that they're misinformed or that they're ignorant or whatever. And also even saying that it's the actions of government that have resulted in the destruction of the currency supply, because it seems that for centuries, if not longer, central banks have actually been calling the shots here, and sometimes being the kingmakers and putting the so-called leaders in their positions in front of us and saying, that's your leader, and then the leader says, I'm going to save you, don't worry. But they're actually beholden to and only allowed to say what they're told to say, and that's to not point the finger at the root cause of the destruction of our savings and earnings and retirement. So, and that being the central banks, it's a terrible fact that this is a page from a very old playbook. You mentioned it came out in the Nixon era. It's come out, I know, in the Bush era. They had hotlines where you could call in and report price gouging, and it's like, yeah, right. It's just reporting symptoms, never really looking at the root cause, because it's a rotten system. And so for those who are trying to opt out of the system, it looks like maybe half the world right now is trying to opt out of the system with the BRICS. You've been telling us about that. And there's some fallacies that have emerged. Frankly, my wife was complaining to me. She does a lot of the research for our channel, and she was complaining to me that when you try to search on major search engines, something is likely, you won't find the true story. You'll find the story that they want you to see. So what are some fallacies, since you've been doing so much research on the half of the world that's turning away from fiat currencies and wanting something that's backed by something real, that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the biggest fallacies is that, people talking about BRICS establishing a common currency, and that these countries would need, of course, then they would need a central bank and presumably be held in China, which is an unacceptable loss of sovereignty, especially between countries like China and India with territorial conflicts. And, well, you have the head of the BRICS New Development Bank who made it clear there are no immediate plans to create a common currency, which I agree. And even if they were willing to put aside their differences, it's hard to see what competitive advantage would ever have between to the current system. And then they talk about a gold-backed yuan or and they always go back to the Eurodollar system, and that we left the gold-backed system to go to the Eurodollar system because it was such a better system. And contrary to what people say, we had gone, I think, 180 years with no inflation and the greatest growth that the world has ever seen in a country by being on the gold-backed system. But I've been reading a lot of this lately, talking about this common fallacy is that there won't be a common currency, and maybe there won't be. And if you look at what they're proposing right now, it is not a common currency. They are proposing everyone having their own central bank digital currency, having their own monetary autonomy. That's number one. And if you look at the global GDP and go 98% of all the gross domestic product of the world and the countries that represent that, every one of them has a CBDC in operation or development. That's number one. If you look at what's been done over the last year, all of these countries are trading in local currencies. They're trading rupee for ruble digital. They're trading, yuan for oil, and that yuan is convertible into gold in the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And all of these local currency tradings that are being done instead of the dollar is first and foremost. Project Mbridge is a vehicle or a platform to allow these countries to seamlessly trade back and forth with one another. Without interference of the SWIFT system, no Western intermediary banks. The dollar is not compatible with Mbridge, and Saudi Arabia just became a full participant in Mbridge. And what they are attempting to do, at least that's what Dilma Rousseff said, the head of the BRICS New Development Bank, former president of Brazil, is that we have agreed in principle to a common settlement currency. It is not a common BRICS currency. This is where people are going astray. They don't have to have a common currency in order for this to work, but a common settlement currency that is pegged 40% to gold and 60% to BRICS plus currencies eliminates the need for a common currency. Each country will have their own system, their own CBDC, their own monetary system, their own little economy that they have to manage and do so in a prudent way. They will not be reliant upon having to go back and forth in and out of dollars to transact with other countries and stand to the KYC and AML problems, the anti-money laundering and know your client, and the cost and the inefficiency and the time, when they can have a common settlement currency, which is addressed by having the gold held within this ecosystem. These unit tokens that they mint are held within the borders of the countries that possess it. They don't even have to send it to a central authority and have it independently and continuously audited. So when we talk about these fallacies that keep popping up that underestimate the relevance of what is happening, this group that is forming, I think they are grossly underestimating the intelligence and the sophistication of these countries who understand exactly the pushback. And instead of making a common currency with a common central bank, everyone holds their own autonomy. But when it comes time to settling, if I've got too many rupee or I have too many ruble, I want the common settlement token. Well, that's gold. And that's gold's role. And that's why the BIS reclassified it Tier 1. And that's why all the countries have been bringing it home, because it will be part of a new system. This is really important for people to understand. And I think it's a trend that's growing. It's literally accelerating. And you can see it in the price of gold. Well, one other thing I'd like to mention, a lot of people say, well, okay, fine. If all of these countries are accumulating gold, what does it mean for silver? And there are some very important things to understand about silver. Number one, first and foremost, China is the number 2 largest producer of silver in the world. And they, for many years, have been a net exporter because they mine all of these other metals. And if you remember, silver is largely a byproduct metal, where in North America, or I guess in all of the mining companies out there, only account for about 25-30% of the silver that comes to market. Most of it comes as a byproduct of mining other metals. So China and their smelters had tons of silver for years. They would export it. As of this year, they have now become shifted from net exporter to net importer. And it's been driven by increased imports and also by, rebalancing their domestic market and not sending out all of this silver that they've been accumulating as a byproduct of other endeavors. And this, first and foremost, is really, really big. So the number 2 producer of silver in the world is now a net importer instead of a net exporter. And then all of the talk, I've done 2 interviews recently with mining executives, and both of them have said the same thing, that they are going around the world, China is, and in particular in Latin America, paying double what the West will pay for unrefined doré and silver concentrate, bringing it home and refining it there. and doing so that it doesn't come off of an exchange and affect the price. And so you have a massive drive by China and India. We know, we've documented all of their accumulation of silver to accumulate silver too. And China is going to great lengths to hide it in terms of how much they're producing and how much they're going around accumulating in unrefined forms because it doesn't reflect in the price. Silver will have its day. And I think China is a perfect example of it. They do things thinking in terms of years and decades. We think in terms of minutes. But when, one of the biggest exporters in the world goes to net import and they're already the number 2 largest producer in the world, it should tell you where silver ultimately will go. It's not tier 1, but it's strategic. It is not an industrial metal as we are led to believe. It's a strategic metal, and it is needed. And the countries of the global south are understanding that. And this is why they're draining the LBMA to the second lowest level they've ever had in the history of the exchange, 140 years. This is why they're draining the COMEX. This is why the others stand for delivery. We've talked about this for years, and they have been doing it very methodically and very opaque in their manner, not transparent. And I think it's accelerating. So silver will have its day, and everything that we've ever talked about silver, I think, will happen in spades. It'll just happen in a manner. It will go from 0 to 100 just like that. We'll wake up and see it repriced or to a whole different level when there just isn't the ability to accumulate it on the exchanges, which are being bled dry. And at some point, all of the people who have silver that would otherwise sell it, they're not going to sell it at the Western price. It will be sold at a price far higher, and probably a price that is then revalued or controlled by countries like China, who, as it is right now, are selling it for $4 an ounce higher in Shanghai. What if it was $40 or $400? It's the same thing as us talking about revaluing gold, where Senator Loomis for Wyoming can say, yeah, I like Trump's idea of the strategic Bitcoin account. We should do that and fund it partially by revaluing our gold that's held by the Fed. Well, there you go. I mean, it's one thing for the Dutch National Banker, the head of the Dutch National Bank, to say, yeah, we're going to revalue gold because it's in the gold revaluation account and it should go much higher to offset our liabilities. But when you see Senator Loomis from Wyoming saying, yeah, we should do this to fund a strategic Bitcoin account, what's the difference if the West revalues it or China revalues it? In essence, a $4 premium to the Western price already is the beginning of a revaluation. So I would say silver is still the most undervalued, probably best potential asset on the planet, regardless of how maddening it has been for the past few years in terms of its counterintuitive price movement and its volatility. If there weren't, and I'll keep going back to the chart Ed Steer put on your show, It's incredible. People understand that there are 8 banks that are holding the largest concentrated position of any commodity ever traded on COMEX in silver. Why? And it's because those 8 banks are being instructed by the people above in the West to keep it down for a reason. And maybe it is to fund the military-industrial complex. Who knows? Point of it is that all manipulations end badly, especially when you see massive efforts by countries like China and India to accumulate everything that's not nailed down, and even do so in a clandestine manner by buying doré and concentrate from the miners that doesn't come off of an exchange, that isn't reflected in the price, so that they can have a strategic advantage that no one sees coming.
For those who want to do what the big players are doing rather than do what they're saying we should be doing, which is basically nothing and just following along and reporting price gouging, and want to acquire real assets in their own hands or in their own names, you often are able to bring weekly specials. I noticed 2 of the 4 this week are silver specials. Do you want to walk us through those?
All right, this week's specials offer, gold, silver, and platinum. And the 1/10 ounce silver Britannia, I've never seen that before. Their 2024s at $4.99 a coin. So they do have higher premiums for the utility. I guess the mint feels it takes the same amount of manpower to mint a 10th ounce coin as it does a 1 ounce coin. But from a standpoint of utility and trading, I don't know that I've ever seen a better coin next to pre-65 constitutional silver. We also have the backdate silver Krugerrand at $60 over spot. The 1 ounce silver Austrian Philharmonic at $3.10 over spot, one of the 6 major mints, a great coin to own. And then the platinum maple leaf for those that see the value in platinum the way that I do, at $80 over the price of platinum per ounce for the 1 ounce maple leaf.
Thank you for those specials, Andy. And I just wanted to circle back with the whole theme of everything we've talked about today. It seems like what James Rawls from survivalblog.com talked about, we're living in the age of deception and betrayal. So invest accordingly, plan accordingly, prepare accordingly, relocate accordingly. This whole thing about the distractions that we're being fed from on high about, reporting price gouging rather than recognizing the root cause of it and positioning ourselves intelligently to be protected from harm, as you just outlined the opportunity, is something that's going to be absolutely critical. And also just misconceptions and fallacies about the BRICS based on misunderstandings or just maybe trying to smear what they're doing, or could be good intended misunderstandings of what they're trying to do. But we need to just stay locked on to, we're going to learn out the real truth, share it here. We'll bring proper people who have done the investigation and can explain things in a way that we can all understand. Folks, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a single episode with Andy or any of our guests, make sure you are on our free mailing list at libertyandfinance.com. Just go to libertyandfinance.com, put in your email address, click submit, make sure you confirm on the confirming email. You'll get 1 email per day in your inbox, including all of our interviews with Andy and any of our weekly specials. Andy, as always, just thanks for joining us on behalf of all of our viewers. We always appreciate your visits here on Liberty and Finance. If you have any parting thoughts, we're happy to hear them. Otherwise, you just have our thanks and appreciation for being here with this weekly market update.
Yeah, I know we're going to start doing live streams, and we're supposed to do it tomorrow night, but it is my 54th birthday tomorrow, so I am going to take a pass on doing the live stream tomorrow night, but look forward to doing that moving forward with you, because to me, I like those much better than just recording back and forth with you and I, because it brings in the interaction. And so I look forward to doing that, especially as we head into the fall here, which has to offer lots to talk about. So I'm grateful for that and look forward to picking up where we left off with you and some follower interaction, viewer interaction next week. And thanks for having me, Dunnigan. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, you just reminded me, when you said that, as far as things that we're not being told, is gold setting an all-time new nominal high weekly close last week and holding strong above 2,500 so far. And you're not hearing that it's doing better than the major stock indices. It's doing better than the bond market.
It's crazy that it's reached this level with no fanfare, no media fanfare. It just goes to show, there are well-read people out there just reading the wrong stuff. And not only has gold outperformed every traditional asset, it continues to march higher. It's the tortoise. Tortoise doesn't get noticed until it crosses the finish line. And so, yeah, it's let it be that way. That's fine by me. It just makes it that much easier to continue to accumulate for people who want to do it, because with such low American participation, positive real yields, and a strong dollar, and it keeps going higher, imagine what happens when the American public wakes up. Imagine what happens to the supply when the American public wakes up. Getting it will be the biggest determining factor. So, yeah, thanks for having me, Dunnigan. It's always insightful, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Take care, Andy.
You too.
This is Kaiser Johnson, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for August 19th through August 26th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature the famous 1-ounce gold Krugerrand at just $60 over spot. Next, we have the favorite bullion coin of Europe, backdated silver Philharmonics at just $3.10 over spot. And finally, we have 1-ounce platinum Canadian maples at only $80 over spot, one of the lowest premiums on platinum we've seen in a long time. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.